Hey guys, in this video we're going to be talking about Appwrite. This is going to be the introductory or the first episode in a series where we're going to build a WhatsApp web clone, essentially a messaging app that allows you to have one-on-one chats or group chats. You can create statuses, you can send messages to each other. I'm not exactly sure what the scope of this is going to be. I think I'll probably keep it open-ended, so we'll start off with just building out the basic chat, and then groups, maybe add statuses, which allows you to post a picture or text for 24 hours that your contacts can see. Maybe after that we'll go into video calls, voice calls. The sky's the limit, but the focus of this course is really just going to be Appwrite. Okay, so first of all, what is Appwrite? If some of you are familiar with Firebase, Appwrite is pretty similar. It's an open source backend as a service. It essentially has pretty much all the functionality that Firebase has, if not all the functionality that Firebase has. It has databases, file storage, authentication management, and everything. So if we look over here, what the feature has: databases, authn users, storage, which Firebase kind of has. We have functions for more custom server code, console, privacy, security. It's a really, really cool platform. We'll get a little bit more into it. So first, let's talk about the technological stack that we're going to be using besides for Appwrite. So Appwrite is essentially all we're going to need for the backend. It's really a backend as a service. So we're not going to have to, hopefully we're not going to have to create any backend code. Everything should just work from the front end. For the front end, we're going to be using Vue-3, using the composition API. And for styling, we're going to use Tailwind Css on top of it, and the build tool will be Vite, or Vite. I'm not sure exactly how you pronounce it. I'm just going to call it Vite, since that's how it seems to me. In any case, so in this video we're going to get set up in the developer environment, and then in the next video we're going to go about building out the first step, which is going to be the authentication, basically allowing users to sign up, sign in, log out, and we'll see where it goes from there. Alright, so the first thing we're going to need to do is go to Appwrite and get started. So if we look over here, it has the command that you're going to need. The command that you need, so if you're on Mac, you can run this command. If you're on Windows, this, PowerShell. Something that you will need before you can actually get started with Appwrite is Docker. So you're just going to do download Docker desktop, and with Mac and Linux this is super easy. With Windows it's a little bit trickier, but it's also not too complicated. If you have Windows Pro or Home or Enterprise, you'll have to install WSL2 Windows Subsystem for Linux, the backend for Docker. Or if you don't have those requirements, you're just going to have to install a virtual machine with Ubuntu, also not too complicated. In any case, I'll leave this link in the description if you're running with Windows, and this is all you really need to do. There's a pretty comprehensive installation instructions over here. Alright, so once you have set up Docker desktop, you'll see that it comes in it looks kind of like this. Once it gets up and running, you'll get this type of screen. Once you see this, and there's a green light over here and there's no errors, we're going to get started with Appwrite. So we want PowerShell for Windows, and we're just going to copy this in over here. Now, something I ran into when I was installing this is that it's kind of annoying, because when you try to paste it in, it pastes it as like multi-line commands, which is kind of annoying. So what what you do over here is, if we look, I have a file called appwrite.bat, and essentially I just created a file, put this stuff in here, and now I'm just going to run appwrite.bat, and that actually runs the whole command for me. It's a bit annoying that you have to do it like that. In any case, now you can start your Appwrite installation. This may take a little bit longer depending on your network. You still have to download the Appwrite Docker container. And just as a note, if you're not familiar with Docker, you don't actually need to understand Docker. It's super easy. You just basically just run this command and it sets itself up for you. So you choose your server port, and we're going to leave it at the default 80, the default HTTPS port. We're basically just going to leave the default for everything. Enter, just keep pressing enter. You'll then run Docker on your machine. This will take a little bit longer the first time set up because you actually have to pull all the Docker images. But on my computer, it shouldn't take very long. There we go. Appwrite installed successfully. And if we look at what that actually does. So if you open up your File Explorer in that location, there we go. So you'll see it actually created a Appwrite folder. And all this Appwrite folder has is a Docker Compose file, which tells us which containers we want to run, and an environment file for Appwrite. So that's super cool. Once we have that, we can confirm that everything is up and running properly by going to Docker Desktop, and you see that the Appwrite container is running. Awesome. So once we have that up and running, all we have to do is go to localhost, just like that. And the first time you go to Appwrite, you're going to have to sign up. And once I sign up, I'll show you something really cool about Appwrite. So let's just say this is Jacob Beckerman. My email is going to be jacob@test.com, and my password. Awesome. And read you the terms and conditions. You can sign up for their monthly newsletter. I'm already signed up, so I'm not going to do that. And sign up. Awesome. Once we get here, you'll see this is really one of the coolest parts that I like about Appwrite, is that once you install it, you can really have as many projects as you want. I mean, it has multi-tenancy out of the box. So we're going to create a project. It's going to be WhatsApp and create. That takes a second to create, and then we'll be taken into the Appwrite console. This is really where you can manage your application. You can see, your databases, your users, the cloud functions, storage, webhooks. And when I say multi-tenancy, you can see if I want to create another project, I can just create a new project, and this could be my second one. It's all hosted on the same instance, which is really very powerful and makes it really easy to manage your projects. All right, so now that we have that installed, we're going to add our first platform, which is a new web app. And let's just call this WhatsApp. And we're going to do start here. Now, what this means is, where can I access the Appwrite API from? Essentially, you don't want anyone to be able to access your Appwrite API. You really want it only accessible from your front end. So for the development environment, we're just going to have star, since it makes things a bit easier. But when you deploy to production, you're going to want to make sure to scope this to your front end. And then the next step is really just to do npm install Appwrite. I'm going to do that in a second. First, what I have to do is install the Vue, or set up the Vue developer environment. So I'll just click register over here. And let's go to getting started with Vite. All right, so we actually want to scaffold our first Vite project. Just do it by that. Go to my terminal and go to projects and just paste that guy in here. npm create Vite at latest. And again, I'll link to all the necessary documentation in the description of this video. And what that does is essentially says, all right, we want to create the a Vite project. So this is going to be WhatsApp. I want it to be Vue and Vue with TypeScript. Then I could do cd WhatsApp. I'll just go into the VS Code for this project. Let's drag that over here. And if we look over here, we now have the basic scaffolding for our Vue project. All we're going to need to do is do npm I to install the dependencies for Vite, for Vue rather. If you look over here, you see it set us up with Vue, the latest version, and all the necessarily build scripts to actually get it up and running, which is really nice. We have a few things here which we're going to clean up. We don't want like the default hello world components or any of this stuff. And the next thing I want to do is actually go back here. We want to install Tailwind CSS. So we're going to get started with that. And in fact, I don't actually want to get started from here. What I'm going to do is like Tailwind CSS Vite. And this actually gives me the exact guide I need to get set up with my configuration. So the first thing I want to do is npm install all these necessary dependencies. Just paste that in here. You can see we're installing Tailwind CSS, Post CSS, and Auto Prefixer. This is just so that Tailwind CSS works properly out of the box. The next command we're going to have to run is npx tailwind css init, which is basically just initializing the Tailwind CSS file and the Post CSS configuration file. Let's paste that in here. So you'll see here that this command generates the Tailwind CSS config file, which we'll see show up here on the left in a second. So bam. So here we have Tailwind config CJS, which is just the Tailwind config file, and the post config, the post CSS config file, which is also up over here. Awesome. That is all for Tailwind. That is all for Vite. And we're going to have Vue open here. We have Appwrite, which is over here, which we no longer need. We have our console. We're just going to quickly get the, so the last thing we need to do is install npmi Appwrite into our project. And this is just going to be the way that we will communicate with our Appwrite backend, which we will see in a second. Awesome. So that is installed properly. And the last thing we're doing is do npm run dev, which will allow us to actually see what we got, make sure we have everything set up properly. So let's just copy that, open this up over here. And here we have the Vite and Vue and the TypeScript setup, which is the title that they give us. We're going to clean that up in a second. All right, so we don't actually need that right now. So we have Vite plus Vue. Awesome. And I guess to finish off this video, all we're going to do is just make sure we can hook up to Appwrite successfully. So all we want to do over now is just get rid of this stuff, and get rid of this stuff, and get rid of this stuff. We don't need this style here either. I'm going to change this around over here. And I forgot one step for installing Tailwind CSS, is that in our style.css, all we want is Tailwind CSS Vite. There's just one last step that I forgot to do, and that is to add this, well, two steps rather. We have content into our Tailwind CSS config file. So if we look over here in our Tailwind config CSS, all we want to do is just paste that into here. And the last thing we need to do is import the Tailwind CSS directives, which will go in our style.css. Just paste that in here, and we are good to go. Something to note with regards to the extensions I'm using is all you have to really install is the post CSS language support, which just makes the CSS file syntax highlighting work. I'd recommend installing the Tailwind CSS IntelliSense and the Vue language features, which is Volar. It's important to get this one as opposed to Vitor, because this is the one that supports Vue 3. Other than that, you don't need to install anything else. So back to our app view, we're set up over here. Let's get rid of this hello world component, which we don't care about. Let's get rid of this assets folder, which we don't care about. And let's just make sure that we're up and running properly by saying h1 welcome. And if we go back to our page, we have welcome here, and we can see that Tailwind CSS is taking effect because the font size is small. That's because Tailwind CSS applies like a global reset so that styling becomes a little bit easier. So that is it for that, and let's just make sure we can we've installed Appwrite properly. So let's make a new folder called API, and in here we'll make a index.ts, index.ts. And over here, all we're going to need to do is follow the Appwrite instructions for getting set up with a web project. Getting started for web, and it's super simple. We installed Appwrite. We need to just import it, import client and account for Appwrite. We're going to create a new client just by doing that, and then all we're going to need to do is do client.set endpoint, which we'll get from our Appwrite console. If you look over here and down at settings, you'll see we now have the API endpoint, which all we're going to do is just copy and paste that into here. And we're going to do set project. And over here, all we need to do is just copy this project ID, paste it in there, and then we're going to export the client out of here. Awesome. The next thing we're going to do, just to create our first account, is say const account is equal to new account, and it accepts the client, and we're just going to export that as well. So now we have the client and the account. If we look back at the documentation, you can see this is how we can create a new user. So let's actually just copy that in here. And when I go to the app.vue. I'm just going to add an on-mounted hook, which says when I'm ready over here, just do this. Obviously, I have to import account from the API folder. And if we look over here, this should have just worked, and we see that we managed to create a user. And if we go to our users subdirectory over here, or whatever you want to call it, you'll see we now have Jane Doe at me@example.com. You can see information about this user. You can update the name, update the email. You can see what memberships they're part of, their current sessions. Well, Jane hasn't yet logged in, and the activity, which is the different events that we'll get into a little bit later. But I think that's good for this this first video. So just for a quick recap, what we did was we set up Appwrite, we set up our front-end environment with Vue and Vite, TypeScript, and Tailwind Css. We installed Docker, and in the next video we'll set up the authentication stuff. So that will be the login form, the sign-up form, and the log-out functionality. So keep an eye out for that. It's coming pretty soon. I'll see you in the next video. Awesome.